public and the people of Auckland in April of this year.
Question number 12, Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And question is to Minister of Corrections and asks, what recent agreements have been signed with the Kangitananga to improve our outcome of Maori offenders?
The Honourable Louise Upston.
Mr. Speaker, this morning the Department of Corrections and the Kingitanga signed an accord to work together to improve outcomes for Māori offenders. The accord commits corrections and the Kingitanga to work together to develop initiatives to improve outcomes for Māori. I applaud the Kingitanga for stepping forward and recognising it has a role in working with corrections to improve the well-being of Māori.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What specific areas of agreement does the accord cover?
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Louise Upston.
one of the 4 areas of mutual interest identified in the accord is the rehabilitation of Māori prisoners. Participation rates in rehabilitation programs run by corrections, including drug and alcohol treatment and parenting skills, already have high levels of participation by Māori. The Department also offers a range of rehab services specifically for Māori, with around 1,300 places available on these programs each year. Mr. Speaker, this accord will help ensure that these programs are targeted at achieving even better rehabilitation outcomes for Māori.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, when Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi has to ask a question about the government's Kingitanga Accord, what has happened to the Māori representation in the National Party? Or are they no longer relevant, or do they disagree with the accord?
Order. There's no ministerial responsibility whatsoever. Order. 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 I've just made a ruling. I hope the member's not going to disagree. If he's raising another point of order, happy to hear it.
Well, no, Mr. Speaker, I was asking you, is not the fact that they might not agree with it ministerial responsibility?
Now the members on dangerous ground of arguing with the Speaker. I've made a ruling. There's no ministerial responsibility. The member may not have heard me, but that is my ruling.
I didn't.
Supplementary question, Kanwaljit Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What other initiatives are already in place to improve outcomes for Māori prisoners?
The Honourable
Speaker.
Louise Upston.
Around half the prison population is Māori, and it's important that corrections keeps building on the initiatives it already has in place to improve outcomes. Corrections has established a Māori advisory board with representatives from 7 iwi organisations to provide advice on policy development and the design of services for Māori. The Department also employs a specialist team of Māori advisors whose objective is to continually promote improvement in the Department's services for Māori.
And that concludes questions for oral answer. Point of order, the Honourable Louise Upston.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table a copy of the accord between the Department of Corrections and Kingitangas for the House's interest.
Is that document publicly available?
No.
On that basis, I'll put the leave. Leave us sought to table that particular accord. Is there any objection? There is objection. I call on government orders of the day, numbers 1 to 3.